who raised her, and that before she met Prince Harry, she truly loved.
By all accounts, Meghan Markle's team have said we've reached out, and yet the Markle team
wrote and had delivered to her father. We do not know who these carrier pigeons are, but
An 80-year-old man sits in a quiet house in Mexico, heart scarred from surgery, body worn down by time, reputation dragged through headlines for years, and inside a fireproof box, he claims, is a version of the story that could shatter everything people think they know. Not rumors, not tabloid noise, documents, letters, records. Proof, he says, of a chapter that was never supposed to exist anymore. Because according to him, this was never just a family falling out. This was a removal, a careful, deliberate removal of a witness who knew too much, saw too much, and remembered too much. For 20 years, he stayed quiet while the world built a story about him brick by brick. The embarrassing father, the outsider, the man who couldn't be trusted. He watched it happen from a distance while the narrative tightened and polished itself into something clean, inspirational, carefully controlled. And the entire time, he says, he was sitting on the original version, the messy one, the uncomfortable one, the one that didn't fit the brand. He says the box has been locked not because he forgot about what was inside, but because he understood exactly what it meant. Because once something like that leaves your hands, it never belongs to you again. And he knew that someday, when the timing was right, when the silence got too heavy, when the distance between the public story and the private reality got too wide, the box would matter. And now, according to him, that time has come.
And took it to TV show sets where he worked as a lighting designer.
He says this didn't start with a big fight, no explosion, no dramatic betrayal in one single moment. He says it was quieter than that, and that's what made it worse. Calls got shorter, invitations stopped coming, conversations became careful, controlled, distant, until one day he realized he hadn't just drifted out of her life, he'd been edited out of it entirely, like a scene removed from a film before release. And the reason, he believes, wasn't family drama. It wasn't personality clashes. It was because he knew something that didn't fit the story that was being built. He had seen a chapter that wasn't supposed to be part of the official narrative. And in a life where image is everything, a witness like that isn't family. A witness like that is a liability. The year was 2000. She was 19, home from university, and according to him, she was not the confident, polished person the world would later see. He says she was exhausted, stressed, scared, and dealing with something privately that nobody else was supposed to know about. He says he stepped in quietly, handled it quietly, paid for everything quietly, cash, no insurance, nothing traceable, nothing that could come back later. At the time, he thought he was just protecting his daughter. Looking back, he believes that was the moment everything changed. The moment he unknowingly became the keeper of a secret that would follow both of them for the next 2 decades. The clinic, he says, didn't even look like a clinic. No sign, no obvious entrance. The kind of place you only find if someone tells you where to go. Discretion was the business model. Privacy was the product. People went there when they needed something handled quietly and forgotten permanently, and she didn't sign in under her real name.
Feel, in my opinion, that my sister is responsible for this. He would not be there.
She signed in as M. Grant, a family name from her mother's side, obscure enough that no one outside the family would recognize it, planned enough that it clearly wasn't a last-minute decision. That detail stuck with him because it told him something important. This wasn't panic. This was strategy. Even at 19, he says, she understood how to disappear on paper. He remembers sitting in that waiting room, paying bills in cash, saying very little, thinking he was just doing what fathers do. But when he walked into the hallway and saw her standing there with another woman he had never seen before, a woman in designer sunglasses, composed, controlled, watching everything, he realized something about that situation was different. He expected relief when she saw him. Instead, he says he saw panic, real panic, the kind of look that only appears when someone shows up who wasn't supposed to be there. That moment never left him because it didn't make sense, unless there were already arrangements in place he didn't know about, unless there were already people involved managing the situation, unless this was already bigger than just a private medical visit.
Measures, just everything, and she could have helped make sure that her father was in a comfortable place through all of this.
He says he accidentally took a photo that day, a blurry hallway shot, time-stamped, nothing dramatic, but enough to show who was there, when they were there, and where it happened. He didn't even realize what he had captured until years later when he looked back at it and understood what that photo actually represented. A place, a date, a set of people, all frozen in one accidental frame. He describes the woman in sunglasses as a fixer, someone who whose job was to make problems disappear before they became public problems. And if that's true, he says, then the machinery of image control was already operating long before the world even knew her name. Years passed. Life moved on. Public image grew. The narrative became polished, powerful, inspirational, and he stayed quiet. He says he stayed quiet because he believed loyalty mattered more than attention, because he believed family mattered more than headlines. Then came 2018. He was lying in a hospital bed recovering from heart surgery, thinking about his life, thinking about his family, thinking about how close he had just come to dying. And then the phone rang.
Has gone into intensive care after being rushed to hospital for emergency surgery.
He says the voice on the other end wasn't warm, wasn't emotional, wasn't relieved that he was alive. It was controlled, direct, focused on one thing only: the documents. Destroy them. Get rid of everything. Make sure it all disappears. Not a conversation, not concern, a request, no, a directive to erase the past. Weeks later, he says, a letter arrived. 7 handwritten pages, careful handwriting, precise wording, no warmth, no dad, no I love you, just his name, sometimes not even that. And in the middle of that letter, again, the same message: destroy the documents. That was the moment, he says, he realized what he had been holding on to all those years actually mattered. Because nobody writes 7 pages asking for something to be destroyed if it isn't important. Nobody tries that hard to erase something that means nothing. So he took the letter and he put it in the fireproof box with everything else. And that box, he says, is still locked, but the silence around it isn't anymore. Trevor Engelson was there before the world knew her name, before the titles, before the carefully constructed image, before any of this became global conversation. Nearly a decade of being together, through failed auditions, small roles, uncertainty, and the long, slow climb in a city that doesn't hand out success easily. He saw the version of her that existed before the transformation, before the media training, before the brand. And when you spend that long with someone, you don't just hear what they tell you, you notice what they don't tell you. At some point, he found something he wasn't supposed to find: a medical referral letter sent to a Beverly Hills P.O. box under the name M. Grant. He didn't confront her. He didn't create drama. He didn't call a lawyer or a reporter. He went straight to Thomas and asked one simple question: is Meghan okay? That question mattered because it showed concern, not strategy. Concern, not leverage, and Thomas never forgot that moment because it told him Trevor knew something without being told directly. That sentence, Thomas believes, explains everything, because it wasn't about the clinic. It wasn't about the medical situation. It was about the future, the image, the plan, the understanding, even at 19, that her life was going to be different and that certain things could never be allowed to follow her into that future. Fast forward years later, and something happens that Thomas says he still cannot explain logically. The clinic, the quiet clinic with no sign, the one built entirely on discretion, quietly moved its entire patient database to an offshore server in Switzerland. No announcement, no public reason, just moved. Old records, decades old, suddenly placed under some of the strongest privacy protections in the world. Thomas contacted them asking for his own billing records, not medical records, just proof of the payments he made. His name, his bank account, his money, and he was told there was no record, no patient, no appointment, no payment, nothing. According to the clinic, the visit never happened, except he has the canceled checks. He has the bank statements. The money left his account. It went somewhere. He sat in that waiting room. But on their side, the record is gone. And that's when this story stops sounding like a family argument and starts sounding like something else entirely. Because records can get lost, files can disappear, systems can update. But an entire clinic moving decades of records offshore and then claiming no record exists at all, that's not normal administration. That's a decision. But records aren't the only thing that exist. People exist. Memory exists. And that's where a woman named Marina comes into the story. A nurse who worked overnight shifts at that clinic back in 2000. She remembers the girl who checked in under a different name. She remembers the woman in designer sunglasses who stayed close and controlled everything. She remembers the request to use a side exit instead of the main door. And she remembers something else. Something she said she never forgot. She said that coming out of anesthesia, when most patients are confused, emotional, barely aware of what's happening, Meghan was asking questions. Very specific questions. Who Who has access to the logs, the visitor signed the registry, who can see the records. Marina said it didn't feel like a patient waking up. It felt like someone managing a production. That detail changed how Thomas saw everything because it meant the awareness, the control, the understanding of image and records and access. It was already there at 19. This wasn't something learned later. This was always there. Marina eventually left California, put distance between herself and that world. When Thomas contacted her years later, she was careful with her words, but she told him one thing very clearly. She didn't want to be the cleanup crew for anyone. That was her phrase. Cleanup crew. Not nurse, not staff, cleanup crew. That's the kind of phrase that stays in your head. And through all of this, Thomas says people misunderstand his point. He says this was never about judging a private medical decision, never about shame, never about punishment. It was about the difference between the public story and the private reality, because the public image is built on openness, authenticity, truth, speaking out, telling everything. And yet, he says, sitting in that fireproof box are cash payments, an alias, a clinic with no sign, a letter asking for documents to be destroyed, and records that officially no longer exist. That gap between the public story and the private history, that's what he says he couldn't live with anymore. He says people have approached him recently offering to help manage his legacy, to help tell his story the right way. He turned all of them down because he knows once those documents leave his hands, he loses control of the story forever. So he made copies, stored them in different places, not because he wants attention, because he knows how stories get erased when the wrong people control the narrative. And after everything, the silence, the distance, the hospital bed phone call, the 7-page letter, the years of watching his grandchildren grow up through photographs instead of in person, he says the thing that hurt the most was not the secret. It was that she thought he was the one person she had to hide it from. He says he was already there. He drove her there, sat in the waiting room, paid the bills, drove her home. He was already part of the story from the beginning. And somehow, in the story that the world eventually got, he became the one person who wasn't supposed to be in it at all. The fireproof box is still locked. The documents are still inside, but the silence that protected them for 20 years is gone now. And once silence is broken, it doesn't go back into the box.